start my reading practice from the book Effective Public Speaking by Dale Carnegie. Here is the way a very interesting writer does it. This is an excerpt from an article by B. A. Forbes on the necessity of executives delegating responsibilities to their associates, not the illustrations, the gossip about people. Many of our present day gigantic enterprises were at one time one man affairs, but most of them have outgrown this status. The reason is that while every great organization is the lengthened shadow of one man, business and industry are now conducted on such a colossal scale that of necessity, even the ablest giant must gather about him brainy associates to help in handling all the reins. Woolworth once told me that his was essentially a one man business for years. Then he ruined his health, and it was while he lay week after week in the hospital that he awakened to the fact that if his business was to expand as he hoped, he would have to share the managerial responsibilities. Bethlehem Steel for a number of years was distinctly of the one man type. Charles M. Schwab was the whole works. By and by, Eugene G. Grace grew in stature and developed into an abler steel man than Schwab, according to the repeated declarations of the latter. Eastman Kodak in its earlier stages consisted mainly of George Eastman, but he was wise enough to create an efficient organization long ago. All the greatest Chicago packing house underwent a similar experience during the time of their founders. Standard Oil, contrary to the popular notion, never was a one man organization after it grew to large dimensions. JP Morgan, although a towering giant, was an ardent believer in choosing the most capable partners and sharing the burdens with them. There are still ambitious business leaders who would like to run their business on the one man principle, but willy nilly they are forced by the very magnitude of modern operations to delegate responsibilities to others. Some men, in speaking of their businesses, commit the unforgivable error of talking only of the features that interest them. Should not be the speaker try to ascertain what will entertain not himself but his hearers? Shouldn't he try to appeal to their selfish interests? Or if for example, he sells fire insurance, shouldn't he sell them how to prevent fires on their own property? If he is a banker, shouldn't he give them advice on finance or investments? If the speaker is a national leader of a women's organization, shouldn't she tell her local audience of the ways they are part of a national movement by citing specific examples from their local program? While preparing, study your audience, think of their wants and their wishes. That is sometimes half the battle. In preparing some topics, it is very advisable to do some reading to discover what others have thought, what others have said on the same subject. But don't read until you have first thought yourself dry. That is important, very. Then go to the public library and lay your needs before the librarian. Tell her you are preparing a speech on such and such a topic. Ask her frankly for help. If you are not in the habit of doing research work, you will probably be surprised at the aids she can put at your disposal. Perhaps a special volume on your very topic outlines and briefs for debate giving the principle. Arguments on both sides of the public questions of the day. The World Almanac, the encyclopedias, and dozens of reference books. They are tools in your workshop. Use them. The secret of reserve power. Luther Burbank said shortly before his death, I have often produced a million plant specimens to find but one or two superlatively good ones, and have then destroyed all the inferior specimens. A speech ought to be prepared somewhat in that lavish and discriminating spirit. Assemble 100 thoughts and discard 90. Collect more material, more information than there is any possibility of employing. Get it for the additional confidence it will give you, for the sureness of touch. Get it for the effect it will have on your mind and heart and whole manner of speaking. That is a basic important factor of preparation, yet it is constantly ignored by speakers both in public and in private. I have drilled hundreds of salesmen and saleswomen, canvassers and demonstrators, say Arthur Dunn, and the principal weakness which I have discovered in most of them have been their failure to realize the importance of knowing everything possible about their products and getting such knowledge before they start to sell. Many salesmen have came to my office and after getting a description of the article and a line of sales talk have given eager to get right out and try to sell. Many of these salesmen have not lasted a week and a large number have not lasted 48 hours. In educating and drilling canvassers and salesmen in the sale of a food specialty, I have endeavored to make food experts of them. I have compelled them to study charts issued by the US Departments of Agriculture, which show in food the amount of water, the amount of protein, the amount of carbohydrates, the amount of fat and ash. I have had them study the elements which make up the products which they are supposed to sell. I have had them go to school for several days and then pass examinations. I have had them sell the products to other salesmen. I have offered prizes for the best sales talks. I have often found salesmen who get impatient at the preliminary time required for the study of their articles. They have said, I will never have time to tell all of this to a retail grocer. He is too busy. If I talk protein and carbohydrates, he won't listen, and if he doesn't listen, he won't know what I am talking about. My reply has been, you don't get all this knowledge for the benefit of your customer but for the benefit of yourself. If you know your product from A to Z, you will have a feeling about it that is difficult to describe. You will be so positively charged, so fortified, so strengthened in your own mental attitude that you will be both irresistible and unconquerable. Miss Ida M. Tarbell, the well-known historian of the Standard Oil Company, told the writer that years ago when she was in Paris, Mr. S. S. McClure, the founder of McClure's magazine, cabled her to write a short article about the Atlantic cable. She went to London, interviewed the European manager of the principal cable, and obtained sufficient data for an assignment. But she did not stop there. She wanted a reserve supply of facts, so she studied all manner of cables on display in the British Museum. She read books on the history of the cable and even went to manufacturing concerns on the edge of London and saw cables in the process of construction. Why did she collect 10 times as much information as she could possibly use? She did it because she felt it would give her reserve power, because she realized that the things she knew and did not express would lend forces and color to the title, to the little she did express. Thank you. That's it for the day.